I was drinking my morning coffee on my waterfront deck in Destin, Florida, watching the pelicans dive for breakfast when a shrill voice cut through the peaceful morning like a chainsaw through butter, and I knew my day was about to go completely sideways. "Excuse me. Excuse me, sir. You cannot block access to community property." I turned to see a woman in her mid-40s marching down the wooden walkway that led to my private dock, waving what looked like official documents above her head. She wore white capri pants, a coral-colored polo shirt, and oversized sunglasses that screamed entitlement. Her bleached blonde hair was cut in that distinctive, "I need to speak to your manager" style that has become iconic for all the wrong reasons. "Can I help you?" I asked, setting down my coffee mug on the table beside my chair. "I'm Brenda Patterson, president of the Emerald Shores Homeowners Association," she announced, as if I should immediately fall to my knees in reverence. "And I'm here to inform you that you're in violation of HOA Bylaws Section 12, subsection 4, regarding obstruction of community waterfront access." I stood up slowly, trying to process what I was hearing. "I'm sorry, what are you talking about?" Brenda gestured dramatically toward my dock, where my boat, a 23-foot center console fishing vessel, was tied up peacefully. "That dock is community property, and you've monopolized it with your oversized vessel. Other residents need access to the water." I felt my jaw tighten. "Mrs. Patterson, that dock is on my property. I own it. I had it built 3 years ago when I purchased this house." "That's not what the HOA records indicate," she said, flipping through her papers with theatrical precision. "All waterfront properties in Emerald Shores have easements that grant community access to docking facilities." This was news to me, and I'd been living here for 3 years without a single issue. I reviewed all the property documents when I bought this house. "The dock is mine, built entirely on my land with my money. There's no easement." Brenda's face was turning red, matching the coral of her shirt. "I don't appreciate your tone, Mr. Vanderbilt. Vincent Vanderbilt II, I said, extending my hand, which she ignored. "Mr. Vanderbilt, I've been HOA president for 6 years, and I know these bylaws inside and out. You will remove your boat and open this dock to community use, or you'll face daily fines of $200. I laughed, which was apparently the wrong response. Brenda's face went from red to purple. "You think this is funny? I have the authority to place liens on your property." "I think you're confused," I said, keeping my voice level. "This is private property. The dock extends from my land, over my underwater property rights, and is maintained entirely by me. There's no community involvement whatsoever." Brenda stepped closer, jabbing her finger toward my chest but not quite touching me. "I'll be back with the sheriff if necessary. You have 48 hours to comply." She stormed off, her white tennis shoes slapping against the wooden planks of the walkway. I stood there, stunned, wondering what kind of crazy I'd just encountered. I'd dealt with difficult people in my career as a maritime lawyer, but this was something else entirely. I went inside and pulled out the thick folder containing all my property documents. The deed was clear as crystal. I owned the waterfront lot, including all structures. The dock had been permitted through the proper channels with the county and the Army Corps of Engineers. There was no mention of any easement or community access requirement. My phone rang. It was my neighbor, Tom, who lived 3 houses down. "Vincent, did Brenda just leave your place?" "Yeah, you know her," Tom laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Everyone knows Brenda. She's been trying to expand HOA control over everything in the neighborhood. Last month, she tried to fine the Johnsons because their garden gnome was 2 inches taller than the allowed height for lawn decorations." "You're kidding." I wish I was. She's on some kind of power trip. Just stand your ground and don't let her bully you." I thanked Tom and hung up, but I felt uneasy. I'd seen what HOAs could do when they got aggressive, even when they were wrong. The legal fees alone could be crushing. 2 days later, right on schedule, Brenda returned. This time she had reinforcements. A man in his 50s wearing khaki shorts and a golf shirt stood beside her, along with 2 other women who looked like they'd been cut from the same cloth as Brenda. "Mr. Vanderbilt, this is Derek, our HOA vice president, and board members Susan and Margaret. We're here for an official inspection of the disputed property." "There's nothing disputed about it," I said, but I let them walk down to look at the dock. I followed, document folder in hand. Derek walked around the dock, taking photos with his phone. "This is a substantial structure." "When was it built?" 3 years ago, shortly after I purchased the property. "I have all the permits if you'd like to see them." Brenda waved her hand dismissively. "Permits don't override HOA covenants." I opened my folder and pulled out the deed. "Show me where in the covenants it mentions dock access." Susan, one of the board members, spoke up. "It's in the master plan developed in 1998 when the community was established. All waterfront improvements are considered shared amenities." "That's interesting," I said, "because my property wasn't part of Emerald Shores in 1998. This lot was added to the neighborhood in 2015 when the developer expanded. My purchase agreement specifically states that while I'm subject to certain HOA rules regarding exterior home appearance and lawn maintenance, my waterfront rights remain private." Brenda's eyes narrowed. "We'll see what our lawyer says about that." "Please do," I replied. "And while you're at it, have them explain how you plan to claim authority over a structure that extends into navigable waters, which falls under federal jurisdiction." That seemed to give them pause, but only for a moment. Brenda straightened her shoulders. "We'll be in touch." After they left, I called my old colleague Marcus, who specialized in property law. I explained the situation, and he agreed to review my documents. "Vincent, from what you're telling me, you're completely in the right," Marcus said after I emailed him everything. "But that doesn't mean they won't try to make your life miserable. HOAs can be incredibly persistent, especially when the board members have nothing better to do." "So what do I do?" "Document everything. Every interaction, every threat, every letter, and don't give an inch. If you let them bully you into compliance, they'll own you." I took his advice seriously. I set up a camera system that covered the dock and walkway. I started a detailed log of every interaction with the HOA. A week passed quietly, and I started to think maybe Brenda had backed down. I should have known better. I came home from grocery shopping to find a bright orange notice stapled to my front door. It was an official-looking document declaring that I was in violation of HOA bylaws and subject to immediate fines of $200 per day, starting 5 days ago, for a total of $1,000 due immediately. I called Marcus again. "They can't do this, can they?" "They can try, but they won't succeed. Don't pay anything. That would be admitting fault. I'll draft a response." The next day, I received another letter, this time threatening to place a lien on my property if I didn't pay the fines and comply with their demands. I also got a mass email sent to all Emerald Shores residents, explaining that one homeowner was selfishly monopolizing community waterfront resources and refusing to comply with established rules. My phone started ringing. Some neighbors called to offer support. Others called to complain that I was causing trouble and driving down property values. It was absurd. Then things escalated. I woke up one Saturday morning to find 3 people on my dock. Not Brenda this time, but residents I'd never met, setting up fishing rods and a cooler. I walked down in my pajamas. "Excuse me, what are you doing?" A man in his 30s looked up cheerfully. Brenda said the HOA resolved the access issue and this dock is open to everyone now. Great spot for fishing. Brenda was wrong. This is private property and I need you to leave. The man's wife frowned. She said you were being difficult about this. We paid HOA dues. We have a right to use community amenities. This isn't a community amenity. It's my dock on my property. I'm sorry Brenda misinformed you, but you need to leave now. They gathered their things reluctantly, muttering about entitled people and community spirit. I felt bad for them because they'd been lied to, but I couldn't let random people occupy my dock. I immediately called Brenda. She answered on the third ring, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. Mr. Vanderbilt, how can I help you? You sent people to my dock claiming it was community property. That's trespassing, and if it happens again, I'm calling the police. I simply informed residents that the dock would be available for community use. If there's been a misunderstanding, that's between you and them. There's no misunderstanding. You're deliberately spreading false information. Stop it now. She hung up on me. That afternoon, I drafted a certified letter with Marcus's help, formally demanding that the HOA cease and desist from all harassment, false claims about my property, and defamation of my character to other residents. We sent it to Brenda and the entire HOA board. The response came 3 days later, not from Brenda, but from a law firm called Anderson and Whitley. Their letter was aggressive, threatening litigation if I didn't immediately comply with HOA demands and pay accumulated fines, which had now grown to over $3,000. Marcus read their letter and laughed. These guys are hacks. They're trying to intimidate you with legal jargon, but they don't have a leg to stand on. Let me handle this. The legal back and forth continued for weeks. Meanwhile, life in Emerald Shores became increasingly unpleasant. Brenda had poisoned the well, convincing many residents that I was the villain, selfishly hoarding community resources. Some people stopped waving when they drove past. Others gave me dirty looks at the neighborhood mailboxes, but some neighbors stood by me. Tom organized a group of waterfront property owners who were concerned about the HOA's overreach. If Brenda could claim authority over my dock, what would stop her from targeting their pools, their gardens, or their other private improvements? We met at Tom's house one evening, about 8 of us total. Tom's wife, Gloria, had made coffee and cookies, trying to keep the mood positive. This is bigger than just Vincent's dock, Tom said. This is about property rights and limits on HOA authority. A woman named Patricia, who owned a beautiful home with a swimming pool, nodded vigorously. Last year, Brenda tried to tell me I needed HOA approval for my pool maintenance schedule. My pool on my property, built before the HOA even existed in its current form. She's out of control. We discussed strategies, including possibly voting Brenda out at the next election or seeking a recall. But HOA politics were complicated, and Brenda had cultivated loyal supporters who benefited from her aggressive enforcement of rules they liked. That's when things took a dangerous turn. I received an anonymous letter in my mailbox, not mailed but hand-delivered. It contained photos of my boat, my dock, and even pictures taken through my windows into my living room. The message was typed, "Accidents happen to people who don't cooperate." I immediately called the police. A deputy came out, took my report, and collected the letter as evidence. He was sympathetic but realistic. "Sir, without knowing who sent this, there's not much we can do. It's technically threatening, but it's vague enough that prosecution would be difficult. I'd suggest security cameras if you don't already have them." "I do, but they're focused on the dock, not the rest of my property. Might want to expand that coverage." I did exactly that, installing cameras around the entire perimeter of my house. The expense was adding up, but so was my determination not to be bullied. Then came the day that changed everything. I was at work, a maritime law office in Fort Walton Beach, about 15 minutes from my home, when my phone buzzed with a motion alert from my dock camera. I pulled up the app and watched in disbelief as Brenda, Derek, and two other people I didn't recognize were cutting the lines to my boat. I jumped in my car and broke every speed limit getting home. By the time I arrived, my boat had drifted about 20 feet from the dock, stopped only by the fact that I'd also secured it with a chain to one of the pilings, which they apparently hadn't noticed or couldn't cut through. Brenda and her crew were standing on my dock, looking pleased with themselves. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, running down the walkway. "Removing an obstruction from community property," Brenda said calmly. "You were warned multiple times." "You just committed vandalism and possibly boat theft. I have it all on video," her smile faltered slightly. "We're exercising HOA authority." "You have no authority here, none." I was shaking with anger. I pulled out my phone and called 911. This time, 2 deputies responded. I showed them the video footage of Brenda and her group cutting my boat lines. I showed them all the documentation proving the dock was my private property. I showed them the threatening letter I'd received earlier. The deputies talked to Brenda separately. I could see her gesturing animatedly, pointing at the dock, showing them her HOA documents. One deputy kept shaking his head. Finally, they came back to me. "Sir, we're going to file a report for vandalism and criminal mischief. Do you want to press charges?" "Absolutely." Brenda's face went white. "Officer, this is a civil HOA matter, not a criminal issue." "Madam, you damaged this man's property. That's criminal. The fact that you're having a dispute about who owns the dock doesn't give you the right to destroy his boat lines." They didn't arrest her on the spot, but they issued her a notice to appear in court. Derek and the other 2 were also cited. Brenda was furious, threatening to sue the sheriff's department, "Sue me, sue everyone." After they left, I had to retrieve my boat, which had drifted further. The current was pulling it toward open water. I called a friend with a boat to help me tow it back and secure it with new lines and additional chains. That evening, my phone exploded with messages. The incident had spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Some people thought the deputies overreacted. Others thought Brenda had finally gone too far. The neighborhood was splitting into factions. Marcus called me. "Vincent, this is actually good for us. She's now committed a crime. We can use this in our civil case against the HOA. She's demonstrated a pattern of harassment and illegal behavior." "I just want to live in peace," I said, exhausted. "This is insane." "I know, but we're close to ending this. Trust me." The court date for the criminal charges was set for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, the HOA's attorney sent another letter, this one slightly more conciliatory. They proposed a compromise where I would pay reduced fines and agree to allow limited community access to the dock on weekends. Marcus and I drafted a response declining their offer and reiterating that they had no legal basis for any of their claims. We also filed a countersuit against the HOA and Brenda personally for harassment, defamation, and attempted theft of services. 2 weeks before the criminal court date, something unexpected happened. I received a call from a man who introduced himself as Gerald Simpson, a new member of the HOA board who'd recently moved to the neighborhood. "Mr. Vanderbilt, I want you to know that not everyone on the board supports Brenda's actions. I've reviewed your property documents, and it's clear to me that you're in the right. I'm working with other board members to remove Brenda from the presidency." "That would be helpful," I said cautiously, but it doesn't undo the damage she's caused. I understand. I want to resolve this properly. Would you be willing to meet with me and look at all the documents together? I'm a retired real estate attorney, and I think I can help sort this out. I agreed, skeptically. Gerald came to my house the next day. He was a tall, thin man in his 70s with kind eyes and an air of competence. We spent 2 hours going through everything: the original neighborhood covenants, my property deed, the HOA bylaws, the permits for my dock, and all the correspondence. "This is exactly what I suspected," Gerald said finally. "Brenda has been operating under a fundamental misunderstanding of the HOA's authority. Your property is subject to certain covenants, yes, but those covenants don't extend to waterfront structures because your lot was annexed later under different terms." She either didn't understand this or chose to ignore it. So what happens now? I'm calling for an emergency board meeting. I've already spoken to Susan and Margaret, and they're willing to admit they were wrong once they saw the actual documents. Derek is Brenda's puppet, but he'll be outvoted. We're going to issue a formal apology and withdraw all fines and legal actions. What about Brenda? Gerald's face hardened. That's more complicated. As president, she has certain protections under our bylaws. But after the criminal charges are resolved, we may have grounds for removal based on mismanagement and abuse of authority. The emergency board meeting happened 3 days later. I was invited to attend and present my case. About 40 residents showed up, far more than usually attended these meetings. The tension in the room was palpable. I presented my documents, walked through the timeline of events, and played selected footage from my security cameras. When I showed the video of Brenda cutting my boat lines, there were gasps from the audience. Brenda tried to defend herself, arguing that she was acting in good faith based on her understanding of the covenants, and that I'd been uncooperative. But Gerald systematically dismantled her arguments, showing how she'd ignored clear evidence and escalated the situation unnecessarily. The vote was 4-1 to withdraw all HOA actions against me. Derek was the only dissenting vote. The board issued a formal statement acknowledging my property rights and apologizing for the harassment, but Brenda wasn't done. As people were leaving, she cornered me in the parking lot. "This isn't over," she hissed. "You've turned the neighborhood against me, destroyed my reputation, and now you're trying to steal my position." "I didn't do any of that," I said calmly. "You did it to yourself by refusing to accept facts and by breaking the law. We'll see what the judge says about that." The criminal court date arrived. I took the day off work and met Marcus at the courthouse. Brenda showed up with her attorney, a different one from the HOA's lawyer, which suggested the HOA had decided not to back her on the criminal charges. The case was heard by Judge Patricia Morrison, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s. The prosecutor presented the evidence: my property documents, the security footage, and my testimony. Brenda's attorney tried to argue that she'd been acting within her authority as HOA president, and that this was a civil matter, not criminal. Judge Morrison wasn't having it. "Counselor, I've reviewed the property documents. Mr. Vanderbilt clearly owns this dock. Even if there were a legitimate dispute about HOA authority, which there isn't, your client had no right to damage his property. This is textbook vandalism." Brenda was found guilty of criminal mischief and vandalism. She was sentenced to 6 months probation, ordered to pay restitution for the damaged boat lines and my legal fees, and required to complete anger management classes. Derek and the 2 others who'd helped her received similar sentences, but with reduced fines since they'd been following Brenda's lead. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt vindicated but not particularly happy. The whole situation had been exhausting and expensive, even with the restitution order. And I still had to live in a neighborhood that had been divided by the conflict. But then things got more interesting. A week after the court date, I received a call from the United States Coast Guard. A Lieutenant Jackson wanted to speak with me about my dock. My stomach dropped. Had Brenda found some federal angle to continue her harassment? Lieutenant Jackson arrived at my house the next day in uniform. He was a serious-looking man in his 40s with a firm handshake. "Mr. Vanderbilt, I understand you've been having some issues with your local HOA regarding this dock." "That's an understatement," I said, "but it's been resolved. She was found guilty of vandalism." "Yes, I saw the police reports." "The reason I'm here is that someone filed a complaint with the Coast Guard, claiming that your dock is illegally obstructing navigable waters and creating a hazard to marine traffic." "Are you serious? Let me guess who filed the complaint." Lieutenant Jackson smiled slightly. "I can't reveal that, but I'm required to investigate all such complaints. May I inspect the dock?" "Of course." We walked down to the dock together. Lieutenant Jackson took measurements, checked the position against his charts, and examined the structure itself. He took about 30 minutes making notes on a tablet. Finally, he looked up. "Mr. Vanderbilt, this dock is completely compliant with all federal regulations. It doesn't obstruct navigation, it's properly permitted, and it's well maintained. Whoever filed this complaint was wasting Coast Guard resources. So I'm in the clear, completely. In fact, I'm going to issue you a letter confirming that this structure meets all federal requirements. That should help if you face any future challenges." Relief washed over me. "Thank you, Lieutenant. I should also mention," he continued, "that filing false reports to the Coast Guard is a federal offense. If we can determine who made this complaint and prove they knew it was baseless, we can pursue charges." "I appreciate that, but honestly, I just want this to be over." Lieutenant Jackson handed me his card. "I understand. But if you change your mind, give me a call. We take false reports seriously." After he left, I had a true legal record showing that every authority, local, state, and federal, had confirmed my ownership and rights to the dock. I had Brenda's criminal conviction. I had the HOA's formal apology. Surely this was finally over. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I discovered that Brenda had been secretly recruiting residents to vote her back into full power at the upcoming HOA election, scheduled for the following month. She'd been going door to door, telling people that she'd been treated unfairly, that the judge had been biased, and that she was the only one with the strength to stand up to bullies like me. Tom called me with the news. "She's got about 30% of the votes locked in, Vincent. If enough people don't show up to vote, or if they are apathetic, she could actually win." How is that possible after everything that happened? Some people have short memories, others weren't paying attention. And some genuinely believe that HOAs need strong leaders who enforce rules strictly, regardless of whether they are in the right. I realized I needed to be proactive. With Gerald's help, we organized an information campaign. We created a simple timeline of events, backed by public records and court documents, showing exactly what had happened. We didn't editorialize or attack Brenda personally, we just presented facts. We hand-delivered these packets to every home in Emerald Shores. We also found candidates to run against Brenda and Derek, people who believed in reasonable HOA governance focused on maintaining common areas and protecting property values without overstepping into private property rights. The campaign got heated. Brenda accused me of conducting a witch hunt. She sent out her own mailings, claiming I was trying to eliminate HOA authority entirely so I could turn my property into a commercial marina, which was completely false and frankly ridiculous. Some residents believed her. I got angry messages accusing me of trying to destroy the neighborhood's character. But more people seemed to appreciate the factual information we'd provided. The election was held on a Saturday in the community clubhouse. I showed up to vote and was surprised by the turnout. Usually, HOA elections drew maybe 40 or 50 people. This time, there were over 200 residents crowded into the room. Brenda was there, of course, dressed in a professional pantsuit, working the room like a politician. She pointedly ignored me. The voting took 2 hours, with each homeowner checking in and casting their ballot. Then came the counting, overseen by an independent third party that Gerald had wisely insisted on hiring. The results were decisive. Brenda lost by a landslide, receiving only 28% of the vote. Derek lost his seat as well. Gerald was elected president, and the other new board members were all reasonable people committed to proper governance. When the results were announced, Brenda stood up, her face red, and pointed at me. "This is your fault. You've destroyed this neighborhood with your selfishness." Gerald stood as well, his voice calm but firm. "Brenda, you destroyed your own credibility by refusing to respect property rights and by committing crimes. It's time to accept responsibility for your actions." She stormed out, and I haven't seen her much since. I heard she put her house up for sale a few months later, though I don't know if it's sold. Life in Emerald Shores gradually returned to normal. The new HOA board focused on actual community issues, maintaining the common areas, organizing neighborhood events, and handling legitimate concerns about property maintenance. They stayed completely out of matters involving private property rights, but the story didn't quite end there. About 6 months after the election, I received another surprise call, this time from an investigator with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. Agent Rebecca Torres wanted to discuss Brenda Patterson. We met at a coffee shop in Destin. Agent Torres was a sharp-eyed woman in her 30s who got straight to the point. "Mr. Vanderbilt, we're investigating Miss Patterson for a pattern of abuse of authority and potential embezzlement from the HOA. Your case helped bring her to our attention, but we've discovered that this goes much deeper. Embezzlement. We have evidence suggesting she was imposing fines and collecting fees that weren't properly authorized by the HOA bylaws, then pocketing the money rather than depositing it in the HOA accounts. We're talking about potentially tens of thousands of dollars over several years." I was stunned. I had no idea. Most victims didn't. She targeted people who were less likely to fight back, elderly residents, people who'd recently moved in and didn't know the rules. You were different because you pushed back and had the resources to fight. That's what exposed her. Agent Torres asked me detailed questions about my interactions with Brenda, the fines she'd imposed, and the threats she'd made. I provided copies of all my documentation, which I'd meticulously maintained. "This is very helpful," she said. "We're building a strong case. I wanted you to know because you'll likely be called as a witness when this goes to trial." The investigation took another 8 months. During that time, I learned that Agent Torres and her team had interviewed dozens of residents, subpoenaed HOA financial records, and traced money that Brenda had diverted to her personal accounts. The evidence was damning. Brenda had been running what amounted to a protection racket, threatening fines and liens to extract money from residents, often for violations that didn't actually exist or weren't properly authorized under the HOA's governing documents. When she was finally arrested, it made the local news. I watched the footage of her being led out of her house in handcuffs, and I felt a complicated mix of emotions. I didn't take pleasure in her downfall, but I was glad that justice was being served and that she couldn't hurt anyone else. The trial happened almost a year after the initial investigation began. I testified about my experiences, as did about 15 other residents. Some of their stories were heartbreaking. An elderly widow testified that Brenda had extracted almost $5,000 from her over 2 years for supposed violations of rules that didn't exist, threatening to take her house if she didn't pay. Brenda's defense attorney tried to argue that she'd simply been overzealous in her HOA duties and that any financial irregularities were accounting mistakes, not intentional theft. But the paper trail was too clear. She'd been systematically stealing from the people she was supposed to serve. The jury found her guilty on multiple counts of theft, extortion, and fraud. The judge sentenced her to 4 years in prison, followed by 5 years probation, and ordered her to pay back over $60,000 in restitution. Standing outside the courthouse after the verdict, several former victims came up to thank me. If I hadn't fought back against her demands and documented everything, they said, she would probably still be in power, still stealing, still bullying. "You did a good thing," Tom said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Not everyone would have had the strength to stand up to her." "I just wanted to keep my dock," I said, which made everyone laugh, but it was true. All I'd wanted was to enjoy my property in peace, to fish from my own dock, to watch the sunrise over the water without interference. I'd never intended to become the catalyst for exposing a corrupt HOA president or to testify in a criminal trial. Life finally settled into a peaceful rhythm. The new HOA board was doing an excellent job. Property values in Emerald Shores actually increased after Brenda's departure, probably because potential buyers felt more confident that they wouldn't be harassed by an out-of-control board. I still use my dock every day, taking my boat out for fishing trips or just sitting there with my coffee watching the pelicans and dolphins. Other waterfront property owners have told me they feel more secure knowing their property rights are respected. Gerald remained HOA president for 2 years, then stepped down to focus on retirement activities. His replacement, a woman named Helen who worked as an accountant, has been equally reasonable and competent. The HOA now publishes detailed financial reports quarterly, and any fine or fee must be approved by a majority of the board with clear documentation of the violation. Brenda served 3 years of her sentence before being released on parole. I heard she moved to Alabama to live with her sister. I hope she found some peace and learned from her mistakes, but honestly, I try not to think about her much. The whole experience taught me several important lessons. First, documentation is everything. If I hadn't kept meticulous records of every interaction, every threat, every letter, I would have been far more vulnerable to Brenda's campaign against me. Second, standing up to bullies is exhausting and expensive, but sometimes necessary. If I'd given in to her initial demands, I would have surrendered my property rights and encouraged her to target others. Third, community matters. The support I received from neighbors like Tom and Gerald made all the difference. I also learned something about HOAs themselves. They're not inherently evil organizations. When run properly by reasonable people, they can maintain property values and create pleasant communities. But they're vulnerable to abuse by individuals who crave power and lack oversight. Strong bylaws, term limits, financial transparency, and regular elections are essential safeguards. About a year after Brenda's trial ended, I was working on some maintenance on my dock, replacing a few worn boards when a young couple walked up. They just moved into a house 3 streets over and were exploring the neighborhood. "Excuse me, sir," the man said. "We heard there was some kind of drama about this dock a while back, Something about the HOA. We're trying to understand what we're getting into with this neighborhood." I smiled and invited them to sit down. I gave them the short version of the story, emphasizing the happy ending, how the community had come together to fix the problems and establish good governance. "So the HOA is okay now?" the woman asked. "Better than okay. They focus on what they should, maintaining common spaces, organizing events, handling legitimate community issues. They stay out of people's private business." "That's a relief," the man said. "We almost didn't buy here when we heard there had been legal troubles, but our realtor explained the whole situation and said it had been resolved." We talked for a while longer, and I gave them Gerald's contact information so they could get involved in the HOA if they wanted. As they walked away, I felt satisfied. The neighborhood really had recovered and improved. These days, I occasionally give talks at community meetings in other neighborhoods about HOA governance and property rights. I've become an accidental expert on the topic, and people seem to appreciate hearing from someone who's been through the worst and come out the other side. My message is always the same. Know your rights, document everything, don't be afraid to stand up to unreasonable demands, and work to ensure your HOA is run by competent, ethical people. Most problems can be avoided with good governance and mutual respect. I've also become friendly with Lieutenant Jackson from the Coast Guard. He occasionally stops by to check on things, not officially but just as a courtesy. He told me that after my case, they started taking HOA-related complaints more seriously, because they realized these disputes could escalate to involve federal waters and navigation issues. "You'd be surprised how often we get calls about dock disputes," he said during one visit. Property owners fighting with neighbors, HOAs claiming authority they don't have, people trying to block access to public waters. Your case is actually used as a training example now. Really? Yep. We show new officers how to verify property boundaries, check permits, and document everything properly. Your meticulous records made our job much easier. I felt oddly proud of that. Something positive had come from a negative experience. The restitution money from Brenda eventually arrived, though it took years and came in small installments as she made payments from prison, and then from her job after release. I used most of it to upgrade my dock with new decking and improved lighting. It seemed fitting to invest the money back into the property that had caused all the trouble in the first place. I also donated some of the money to a legal aid fund that helps homeowners fight improper HOA actions when they can't afford attorneys. Not everyone has the resources I had, and I wanted to help level the playing field. My boat is still tied to my dock every day. I've added a small kayak that I use for exploring the quieter inlets and marshes. The whole setup is exactly what I envisioned when I bought the property. A private waterfront retreat where I can relax and enjoy the natural beauty of the Florida coast. Tom and I often fish together from the dock, and we've been known to share a beer while watching the sunset. His wife Gloria sometimes joins us with snacks, and we'll spend the evening talking about everything except HOA drama. "Remember when you first moved in and everything was quiet?" Tom said one evening. "Then Brenda happened. How could I forget? I was so worried you'd just give up and move away. Lots of people would have." "I thought about it," I admitted. "There were days when it seemed easier to just sell and start over somewhere else, but this is my home. I wasn't going to let someone steal it from me, even if they were using legal threats instead of physical force." Gloria raised her glass. "To standing your ground." We all clinked glasses and drank to that. The neighborhood has developed a kind of mythology around the whole incident. New residents hear various versions of the story. some more accurate than others. I've heard tales that make it sound like I had a dramatic standoff with armed HOA officials, or that Brenda went to prison for 20 years, or that the Coast Guard arrested her personally. I try to set the record straight when I can, but I also understand that stories take on lives of their own. The core truth remains. Someone in authority abused their position, attempted to steal private property, and was held accountable through the legal system. That's what matters. One unexpected benefit of the whole situation is that I've become closer to my neighbors. Before the conflict, I was friendly but distant, focused on my work and my solitary hobbies. The experience forced me to engage with the community, to build alliances, to communicate and cooperate. I know far more people now, and I've developed real friendships. We have regular gatherings at various waterfront homes, informal potlucks where people bring food and we enjoy the water views together. Sometimes we organize group fishing trips or boat excursions. The sense of community is stronger than ever, partly because we went through adversity together and came out better for it. There's an irony in that. Brenda's attempt to claim my dock for community use actually ended up creating more genuine community than any forced sharing could have accomplished. People came together voluntarily, building relationships based on mutual respect rather than compulsion. I still practice maritime law, and my experience with Brenda has actually enhanced my practice. I better understand what my clients go through when they face property disputes, bureaucratic overreach, or legal bullying. I can offer not just legal expertise, but genuine empathy and practical advice based on personal experience. Several clients have hired me specifically because they heard about my case. They want an attorney who won't back down from a fight, who understands the emotional toll these disputes take, and who has a proven track record of success. My practice has grown substantially, which is another unexpected positive outcome. On the 3-year anniversary of the final court verdict, Tom organized a dock freedom party at my place. About 50 neighbors showed up, bringing food, drinks, and good humor. Someone made a cake decorated with a little fondant dock and boat. We laughed, ate, told stories, and celebrated not just my victory but the neighborhood's transformation. Gerald gave a short speech thanking everyone who'd stood up for proper governance and property rights. "What happened here could have destroyed this community," he said. "Instead, it made us stronger because good people refused to accept wrongdoing. That's worth celebrating." There was applause, and then someone started a chant. "Vincent's dock, Vincent's dock." Everyone joined in, laughing at the absurdity of chanting about a dock. But it was really about more than that. It was about standing up for what's right, about community, about justice. As the party wound down and the sun set over the water, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, I stood on my dock, looking out at the peaceful scene. My boat bobbed gently in the current. Dolphins played in the distance. The stress and anger of those conflict-filled months felt like ancient history. I thought about Brenda sometimes, wondering if she ever reflected on how differently things could have gone. If she'd simply checked the property records carefully, if she'd approached me respectfully, if she'd accepted the truth when it was presented to her, she would have avoided criminal conviction, prison time, and public humiliation. Her life would have taken a completely different trajectory. But she'd chosen the path of arrogance, of refusing to admit error, of escalating rather than de-escalating. Those choices had consequences, not just for her but for everyone she'd bullied over the years. I'd made choices too. I could have backed down, paid the fines, given in to her demands. Life would have been easier in the short term, but I would have sacrificed my property rights and my self-respect. I would have taught my neighbors that bullying works. I would have enabled Brenda to continue hurting others. Standing up had been the right choice, even though it was hard. That's what I try to tell people when they face similar situations. Yes, fighting back is difficult, expensive, and stressful, but sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes you have to draw a line and say, no further. The legal system worked eventually. That's important to acknowledge. It was slow and imperfect, but ultimately justice prevailed. The police took my complaint seriously. The courts examined the evidence objectively. The truth mattered more than aggressive legal posturing. I'm grateful for that, and for the people who helped along the way. Marcus, who provided excellent legal counsel. Lieutenant Jackson, who confirmed my federal compliance. Gerald, who brought sanity back to the HOA board. Tom and other neighbors who offered support. Even Judge Morrison, who saw through Brenda's attempts at manipulation. It took a village to defeat one determined bully, which is a sobering thought. But it also shows the strength of community and institutions when they function properly. My dock stands as a symbol now, not just to me but to the whole neighborhood. It represents the principle that private property rights matter, that abuse of authority won't be tolerated, and that ordinary people can successfully stand up to those who try to oppress them. I take good care of it, maintaining it carefully, keeping it in excellent condition. It's not just about practical concerns or property values. It's about respect for what that dock represents and what we all fought to protect. Sometimes when I'm out there alone in the early morning, coffee in hand, watching the world wake up, I feel a deep sense of peace and satisfaction. This is mine. I earned it through honest work. I paid for it fairly. I defended it successfully. No one can take it away from me. That's the American dream, really. Not wealth or fame, but the simple ability to own something, to build something, to enjoy the fruits of your labor without interference from those who would abuse their authority to take it from you. My private dock in Destin, Florida, is more than just wood and pilings extending into the water. It's a testament to perseverance, to justice, and to the idea that when good people stand together, they can overcome even the most aggressive bullies. The water laps gently against the dock supports, a peaceful sound that never gets old. My boat is ready whenever I want to head out for a day of fishing or just cruising the beautiful Emerald Coast. Seagulls call overhead and the salt air fills my lungs. This is home. This is peace. This is victory. And nobody, not Brenda Patterson or anyone else, can ever take that away from me. The fight was worth it, every difficult moment, because now I can stand here knowing that justice was served, rights were protected, and a community was made stronger. The sun climbs higher in the sky, promising another beautiful day on the Gulf Coast. I finish my coffee, set down the mug, and prepare to take my boat out for a morning fishing trip. Life is good. Life is right. And my dock, my private property that I successfully defended against all attempts to steal it, remains exactly where it should be, firmly attached to my land, serving only me and anyone I choose to invite. That's how this story ends, not with dramatic confrontation, but with quiet satisfaction and the simple pleasure of enjoying what's rightfully mine. Sometimes the best victories are the ones that let you return to normal life, to peace and contentment, knowing you stood up for what was right and won.